You have reached Deception Detection Radio with Kay from the Deception Detection Network. Please stay on the line while I connect you with the truth. Hi everyone, welcome to Deception Detection Radio. I'm Kay. I pray you all had a blessed week. Tonight I am welcoming returning guest Gary Wayne. Gary is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. Gary is a Christian contrarian who has had a lifelong love affair of biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. He spent 30 years researching and writing the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. This extensive study and research encompassed the Bible, the Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, Gilgamesh, and other ancient epics, also language etymology and secret society publications. It is my pleasure to welcome back to Deception Detection Radio, Gary Wayne. Welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for taking the time to come back on with me. How are you tonight?
Doing very well, and thank you, Kay, again for having me back. I thoroughly enjoyed the shows that we did previously, and I think what we're going to talk about tonight, I think the fans are going to, or the audience are going to walk away with a significant more amount of knowledge and ask more questions as to the influence of the Rosecrucians and what they're doing today and how they've influenced our history.
It's absolutely fascinating, and thank you. I really appreciate you coming on with me. You're just a plethora of knowledge. It's fascinating to hear what you have to say, and the Genesis 6 Conspiracy it blew my mind. So I'm praying the same thing, that people walk away with more knowledge and see a lot of what's going on today and how it correlates to its origins. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and say the opening prayer tonight, and then we will get started on our journey. How's that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, again, I thank you for all your blessings and bringing us all together. You have so much, Lord, that we want to share with the world. And it's your knowledge, Lord, that we want to share in your ways. Please guide tonight's broadcast. Make your words our words. Please open the ears of the people to hear and soften their hearts so that your word may be etched upon them. Please bless the listeners, bless Gary and myself, and put a hedge of protection around all of us so that nothing may interfere or prevent your word, Lord, from getting out. We serve you, Lord, we love you, and we thank you in each and every way for you being the most awesome and wonderful Father that there ever could be. In Jesus' holy and mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, where would you like to start the journey, Gary?
Where would you like to start? I think you're a little bit more in tune with maybe what the audience may or may not understand, and perhaps where to begin, because we're going to move forward, backward, sideways, up and down, left, right.
All over.
So all over, because these tentacles go in so many different directions. So where do you think would be a good place to start?
I think that the 5 people that had the influence with the Rosecrucians would be a good place to start, and how it actually came through Aleister Crowley. A lot of people do not realize that its origins, where it started at, and how it transpired to where we are today, and who it went through.
Yeah, and Aleister Crowley is definitely a Rosecrucian from the Order of the Golden Dawn, which actually has its roots in the upstart of Rosicrucianism, or not Rosicrucianism, but Theosophy movement in Germany in about 1888. And so that's why there's so many close ties between people like Haushofer, who was one of the mentors of Hitler, and Aleister Crowley, because secret societies influenced the Nazi regime significantly, and Aleister Crowley was part of the order that was part of the secret societies of the Rosecrucianisms that were influencing Adolf Hitler. And so Crowley is known as sort of a 666 figure and thought of himself as kind of an antichrist figure. Now, he was more of an antichrist wannabe, but he felt and represented so much of what this Golden Dawn and Rosicrucian order is all about. So when you look at the 666 aspect, the idea that he felt that he was an avatar for spirit guides that were leading him in an antichrist type direction and mentoring an antichrist type figure with by influencing Hitler, it sort of gives a reflection of how important and how deep the rabbit hole goes when we talk about anything about the Rosicrucian order.
Mm-hmm. Well, even going back farther, the fact that Francis Bacon, it was interesting to see how their lives overlapped each other so that they could continue the person before them, the work that that person had started, and be able for it to go to the following person.
Yes, so when we look at the modern Rosicrucian order, and I think the five that you're probably referring to are Thomas More,
Yes.
Abbe Rabelais, Abbe John Valentine Andrea, Robert Flood, and of course Francis Bacon. And of course there's many other writers, but they're all writing, from say the 1450s to early 1600s, with Francis Bacon being the last one, also being a Rosicrucian, and also being the inspirational founder for the Invisible College, which is a Rosicrucian term. Other people will know the Invisible College more as the Royal Society, which is the order that was set up to bring in modern science as we know it today. And so his picture is one of the three pictures that are hung in the Royal Society today because of his influence. And his influence to bring about this society, or the Royal Society, was a book called The New Atlantis. And The New Atlantis was a combination of him combining his own beliefs with Rosicrucian philosophy and advanced learning. The book The New Atlantis is built upon his book that was written previously, which is De Augmentis Scientiarum. And so he then moves on to the New Atlantis, and he creates this end-time scenario, this end-time model that the Rosicrucian order and all the various aspects of the secret societies working together are trying to bring out. And what they're attempting to do is bring one universal government with a universal religion that works in harmony with the end-time government and science. And so that was his dream. And so with bringing on the Royal Society to start sort of a new start to what they were doing with the ancient knowledge, it was a move away from sorcery and into science, a move away from magic and into science, and to create this scenario where they would have some breathing room between themselves and the church so that they could continue to develop their knowledge and honor the great architect of the universe, which is why the Royal Society and all science and universities and everything was created, to represent the great architect of the universe, also known as Lucifer, which is also, of course, people will know that the great architect is also the god of the Freemasons. No coincidence there, because Freemasonry and Rosicrucian, and they partnered to establish the Royal Society. So you can see the influence that these writers are doing. They're creating this intellectual dynamite for these organizations that they're going to create. And yet, these writers weren't really the beginning of the Rosicrucian order. It's just the aspect of the one order of the secret societies that we see developing after the breakup of the Templars. So I'm not sure whether or not we want to talk a little bit more about these five people, or we want to move into sort of a history of the Rosicrucian order so that people have a better understanding. Which kind of direction would you like to go on this?
I would like to go into the history because it's extremely interesting, the crossover in today's world.
Let's mark a couple of quick dates here. And we don't see anything visible, really visible, from identifying the Rosicrucian order till about 1623, as I recall. And that was their first appearance, where they come out as the College of the Brothers of the Rosy Cross. And I want to put that in because the Rosy Cross is going to be a significant piece of the allegory as we start moving backwards and sideways on the Rosicrucian order. And they formed with 36 members of nobility and elite of the world that were running it, and they're still sort of part of that higher structure to the Rosicrucian order. So there's 36, and they call themselves the Invisible Ones. And they call themselves the Invisible Ones at this time with this College of the Brother of the Rosary Cross, because who they receive their knowledge from are the invisible ones, the spirit guides, the avatars, the demons, the fallen angels, and they talk with these spirit guides or demons or fallen angels or all of the above on a continual basis, and they're known as the Invisible Ones. And so when we look at the name of the Invisible College, which is the alternative name for the Royal Society, all we're seeing there is that Rosicrucian sort of allegory being overlaid on things. But if we go back a little bit further, they're actually forming before, because even if we look at those 5 writers we talked about, the oldest one listed there would be Thomas More, and he lived between 1477 and about 1535. Mm-hmm. So significant writings going on before that. So when do they actually form? Well, let's look at 1307 as a significant date. And in 1307 is when the Templars were disbanded by a combination of the French kingship of that time, who wanted their money and their wealth and their treasure, and the Catholic Church, who knew that the Templars ran a secret society and a religion that was totally counter to what the Catholic Church believed and the secrets that they held within. So at that abolishment, there's a whole number of groups that were going to be formed afterwards to take over what the Templars were doing as this hugely important organization working for the Gnostics and the underground moles of the Gnostics, who were the Benedictines and the Cistercians, who hid the Templars within the Catholic Christian organization. So they did a lot of things, and so I'm just going to list off a number of groups that people are going to be aware of, because they were all kind of rising shortly after, and then I'm going to loop back into the Rosicrucians. But I want people to understand that the Templars, and we talked about the Rosy Cross, we're going to come back to that with the cross and the cross of the Rosicrucians in a while. But the groups that had to be reformed after the Templars were disbanded were, one, the Rosicrucians, and they were established to continue with keeping Gnosticism alive and the history and the knowledge and the pursuits of Thoth, Thoth, the god of Egypt, alive, and that ancient knowledge that comes from the antediluvian society. They were also the resources and the location that we're going to keep the absolute science, the science that has the ability to destroy everything if it got loose, and that's the science of alchemy that they're really known for, and that's called the absolute science in their knology. And so they were going to keep also the literary aspect going and funding that. So that's what the Rosicrucians were designed to, and they were also going to be acting as liaisons between the noble bloodlines above the Rosicrucian order and all the other orders below the Rosicrucian order. So they're a very, very important sort of crossroads up the chart of power in the secret societies. So the other ones that were formed to replace the Templars were the Freemasonry organization, and again, they were formed right after they were disbanded as Templars, and they escaped to Scotland under King Bruce, who was excommunicated by the Catholic Church at that time, and so he protected the Templars at that point in time, and the St. Clair family, who were the St. Clairs out of France, that had also extended their family into Scotland, and a very, very powerful family and part of the 13 families of Scotland. Mm-hmm. And so the Sinclairs were the family that starts Freemasonry. And they were created to continue to influence the political aspect of what was going on and the military aspect. And they were also put in place to be a preparatory organization for the secret society, so they could bring in the new blood, the new wealth, and you have to be invited to be part of Freemasonry. And then that leads us up to, once you become illuminated at Freemasonry as an adept at the 33rd degree or the 3rd degree, you're not only illuminated, but you are now put into the Illuminati. And of course, the Illuminati begins in around the 1500s as well, and some people speculate maybe a little bit earlier, but the earliest references we have is about the 1500s. And they merge with Freemasonry between 1777, 1783, somewhere in there, just as the Rosecrucian order and Freemasonry merge on a lower level sort of aspect relationship at 1760 with the implementation of the Royal Society. And so now we have a hierarchy of these three orders and that work in tandem. So you have Freemasonry below, Illuminati, and Rosecrucianism. So Freemasonry provides for lower blood levels and initial training into the Illuminati, and then the most illuminated and ennobled bloodlines of the Illuminati then get drafted into the Rosecrucian order. And there they're going to mix with the pure bloodlines that really run the Rosecrucian order. The other groups that were formed was the Royal Society in 1760, so that they could take control of... Oh, and the Illuminati was formed, to work at destroying Christianity, number one, and number two is to create a world government. So that's what their two objectives were. The Royal Society we already talked about. Well, that was to take over the education, because before the creation of the Royal Society, the Catholic Church controlled all of the schools. And so this was to drive a wedge into that and get control of the education system. We also have the Jesuits, who were also created in about the 1500s to create another sort of military role that's hidden within the Catholic Church to do the things the Templars were doing. And then we also have the Bowers that were raised up to be the bankers, who changed their name to the Rothschilds when they opened up the London Bank. And the reason why they needed that is the banking arm is because the Templars were the first modern bankers. So what I'm talking about is how many things the Templars did that had to be split up into all of these different groups. And so this would prevent, going forward, that if something were to happen to a individual group, all these other ones would still be able to work towards their goal.
Mm-hmm.
So if we understand then that the Templars are sort of the crossroads of going forward to the formation of the Rosecrucians, we first hear about Rosecrucian influence in around 1397 to 1408. There's a couple different important dates there where we have formation of the Ordo Canis, or the Sakarni Rand, in Hungary with King Sigismund. And he becomes the King of Jerusalem, which is, again, a very, very important title for the Antichrist. And so many of the royal families, and including royal families a little bit later from England, moved to put this Ordo Draconis back into place as the dragon kingship, because what has happened at this point in time in history is the Rex Du, the secret societies, the ennobled bloodlines, they've lost the kingships by this time in France for many, many centuries and don't control it. That's one of the reasons why they started the French Revolution, to try and get the monarchy back.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tudors in England had just usurped the kingship from the Plantagenet dynasty. And so you did have the Stuarts, which come from the Bruce kingships in England, or in Scotland, still in place, but they didn't really have any of the major kingships. So they established the Ordo Draconis. And this order is with King Sigismund, and what they're doing with this order is not only to secure the succession of the dragon bloodlines, but to continue with the pursuits of Thoth, the ancient knowledge. And the sign of this organization at this time is the Oribus, which is a dragon encircled with a cross, and that's the Rosecrucius. And this cross is a little bit different than what most people think of a cross, because there's three sort of characters put into one there. So you've got the cross piece, the up and down piece, but you've got this little circle at the top. And so the Oribus, or the Rosecrucius, or the Mark of Cain, as some people also call it, was part of the iconography and imagery of this new order, this new dynasty being set up amongst European kings. And many of these members were part of the Rosecrucius order. So that's the first sign that we see. So of a real visible sign, and we know that they were already operating as a Rosy Cross order, because Bruce had created an order in about the 1370s of the Rosy Cross order, reforming it. And so they were active already in Scotland, and now we see a little bit more of the product happening over in Europe. And the Rosy Cross order formed by King Bruce was for, again, the most ennobled and illuminated of the bloodline. So it would be a very, very, very powerful group that was reestablishing the Ordo Draconis in Europe. And it's so interesting to connect them back to Thoth again, and Enoch, and everything that happened in the antediluvian period, because the Rosecrucians and the Rosecrucians, as we'll talk maybe a little bit further, they actually go back to about 3500 BCE. So they form and they organize, and their symbology goes right back with Freemasonry, right back with mysticism, all back to the epicenter before the flood in Genesis 6.
All going back to the 7 original sciences.
Yes, that the Invisible College is there to, in 1760, when it's formalized, to continue to develop, because they want to develop knowledge in a way that does not honor God. They want to develop to honor Lucifer, the great architect of the universe. And so they are going to do everything to take the credit away from what God does and place it elsewhere. And that's the whole goal of modern science, and to brainwash people so that they don't look around and say, hey, this is obviously made by God.
Wow, that's really heavy to try to take that in, because we as Christians know that that's absurd.
Yeah. But if you look at the product with secular history, or secular science and archaeology and everything that goes on in education today, there is no honor going to God. They'll honor anything else but God.
That's
to say
true.
How it came about. And that's the end product of taking control of the education, why it's such a powerful, powerful tool. And so the Rosecrucians, they're influencing so many organizations and influencing so much of the literature, and also influencing a thought belief. And people may not know this, but Theosophy, which created Ariosophy as a rogue offshoot for the Nazis, is an offshoot of the Rosecrucian order, who was housing the ancient Gnostic religion. And they created Theosophy to be more palatable Western religion that is actually Eastern religion and or the Gnostic cosmology. And they created Theosophy in the spirit of what Francis Bacon was talking about, in terms of finding a way to have religion and science work together. This is polytheist religion and science, not monotheist religion. And so Theosophy was created to build a bridge between science and religion, which is Bacon's part of his end time goal in the New Atlantis.
Was he the one, correct me please if I'm wrong, but was into the how do I pronounce this? Zoroastrist movement and the Kabbalah, trying to bring that all as one?
Yeah. You're talking about the Zohar and Kabbalism?
Yes.
Yes. And when we look at where Rosicrucian comes from, a big aspect of it is the Zohar belief, Kabbalism, mystic Judaism, as some people would refer to it as. And this is the religion of the Essenes. And again, if people look at any sort of the iconography of the Essenes, they're going to see that interesting little cross where you have that circle on the top. You're also going to see that imagery in the Egyptian religion. but it's not the cross that Christians recognize. It has a distinctly different meaning for them. But this is Jewish mysticism as we would know it, as coming together with alchemy. And chemistry is also is the particular part of the sciences that the Rosecrucian specializes in, which developed alchemy. And in case people don't understand where the word alchemy comes from, that's alchemia is, as I recall, is Egyptian or Arabic for the black land of magic, or black magic is it's been transliterated as, and that the chem in alchemy stands for the chem of Mendes, and Mendes was a place where they did the black science in Egypt, and of course that was also the home of Azazel, the infamous leader of the Watchers. And so the chem of Mendes is actually Azazel, and Azazel was the main one in the ancient period giving them this knowledge. And so this sort of cult of speaking with avatars and demons and fallen angels to continue to get illicit information is one of the aspects of what the Rosecrucians do. But we need to understand that the Essenes and the Rosecrucian order, they're part of the same long-term historical religion and secret society. And we see that come about in Freemasonry and the different rituals that they'll have specific rituals that relate back to the Essenes, and they'll also have specific rituals that connect back to the Knights Templar, and that one would be called the KTs.
Instead of Knights Templar, they just abbreviated it.
Yes. So did I answer your question about the Kabbalism? I kind of got going in a different direction there.
Oh, that's okay. I was just wondering if that was the beginning of gearing towards that one world religion.
Well, that history actually began a lot sooner than that. But in terms of the modern aspect, yes, he would be the one that's really trying to get this all sort of gelled into one movement.
It's amazing to think how far back that goes, and it's still being attempted today.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
They just don't give up.
Well, and they won't, because they want that rendezvous with destiny. They want to bring about the end time. That's their goal. And believe it or not, and maybe many of your audience don't quite understand this, is that they believe they're the forces of light and we're the forces of dark. They also believe that Lucifer is the equal to God. That's constitutive aspect of their belief. And they want this rendezvous with destiny because they believe they will win. And they also want to bring about world government and a universal religion, not only to have the false Messiah come about, but to unite what they call the spark of the divine, or the 1,000 points of light, so that they can evolve into godhood. They want to bring this about. They're working very hard to bring it about. They'll accept the ordained time if they have to, but they would prefer to bring it about in any other time. But of course we know that until the restrainer is moved, they will not be able to bring this completely about. They can put everything in place, but they can't bring it in place until the restrainer is removed, and they will accept that period of time, and they will make their stand, and they will lose. And in case people don't know, evolution from Darwin probably has its roots in Eastern Buddhism, and that belief, and people don't know, Darwin was heavily influenced by Eastern religions. Evolution is more not an evolution of the physical aspect. In their belief system, that's just an overlay to deceive people. They believe in reincarnation, which they believe is an evolution of the spirit to become a god.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so reincarnation comes in is that they believe that by being able to live many lives, that they'll learn more and be able to discipline knowledge and eventually be able to evolve into gods.
That would make a lot more sense than a physical reincarnation.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual enlightenment that they expect to reappear than the body.
Right.
Interesting.
Some of the other things that the Rosecrucians are responsible for, because they are such an important organization, is the creation we've seen in the last few hundred years of what they call social masonry, was to fun, and people probably don't realize it, but Karl Marx and Lenin were both Freemasons. And so in social masonry, they developed anarchism as a political movement. They developed communism, and they developed National Socialism. And that's one of the key connections to the World War II and Adolf Hitler. And when communism got out of control, it went rogue, and they could no longer control it. That's when they created the National Socialist movement to put down the communist movement. And then that got out of control, and so they got behind the West big time with the Allies with funding like crazy to correct that mistake again. So the Rosecrucians are active all of the time. They're also the sponsors of all of the literature and ideology that goes into things like whether it's fairy tales, or it was Shakespeare, or it's Robin Hood, or it's science fiction. And this is a tradition that goes back right into the classics, that they are going to keep their history alive and their genealogies alive through allegory in all of these writings. And so when we talk about the Holy Grail, those were sponsored first by the Templars, which, if we back up into, we're going to learn that they're part of the Rosecrucian movement that developed that literature as well. And that's why you also see Templars forming or being in the Grail mythology, because the Grails were thought not, the Templars were not formed until 1099. So how is that possible? Well, they're just overlaying themselves, but what they're really talking about is a special order of the Rosy Cross that goes back into prehistory.
So you're saying that if someone sits down and they read to their children, say, Mother Goose, that is steeped in the politics and with the Rosicrucians, that it's actually not just an innocent story, but it has a much, much deeper meaning and influence.
Absolutely. And
Wow.
it's absolutely saturated with their philosophy and their religion in preparation to brainwash the children. Everything they're doing is brainwashing. And that's why, you see all of these elves and fairies and things in Walt Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Or it doesn't matter what sort of genre you go to. I mean, look at Shakespeare. He's absolutely filled with fairies and elves and characters that link back into prehistory, like Titania, back to the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm. Very evil.
Very evil. And specifically what Shakespeare was writing about is again, encoding and keeping track for history some very, very, very important kingship dynasties.
I'd heard that Shakespeare was actually a pen name that someone else had used, and I cannot remember who that was, but that Shakespeare really didn't exist, but the person who actually wrote the stories used the name Shakespeare to get away from persecution and that type of thing. Have you ever heard of that, Gary?
Yes, and there's also a couple of movies out that tell a little bit about that. Now, from what my research tells me is they're giving a piece of the truth, but they're not giving a lot of the truth. So when we look at Shakespeare, he was the son of a butcher, as I recall, and did not receive much of an education. But yet, his writing is of a spectacular Oxford sort of style.
Yes.
And that he also has all of this knowledge that a son of a butcher shouldn't have. He has knowledge of the classics. He has knowledge of genealogies. He has knowledge of mystical and Rosicrucian symbols, because Shakespeare is just filled with Rosicrucian symbols. So the theory is that somebody wrote all the plays and then gave them to Shakespeare to go to the Strand Theater, which is, again, a Rosicrucian theater, if people don't know that, and full of Rosicrucian symbology and built by the Rosicrucians to continue the entertainment and the propaganda and the brainwashing that they like to do and to keep their history alive. So he was created as a front for somebody else. Now, you may find this surprising, you might not. There are many, many, many people who believe that Sir Francis Bacon is Shakespeare. And this is the same person who wrote the New Atlantis. And this is the inspirational leader for the Royal Society.
Fascinating. What easier way would there be to put this under someone's nose?
Yes. And I'll talk about this in the book because it just has enough connections that I will cover it off in the book. Not in huge detail, but I will cover it off.
Were there other people that we know from history that had roots in with the Rosecrucians, but since it was supposed to be a secret society, that it was kept under wraps until much, much later?
You're going to hear of people like Leonardo da Vinci. You're going to hear Sinclair names, but these will go back, depending on which part of the history that you're going to look at. So let me introduce an organization two organizations that found the Knights Templar, and I'm going to give another date and a split that will help piece a few more things together. The two organizations most responsible for I guess there's actually three, for forming the Templars were the Ormus order out of Egypt, which again is a Gnostic order, the Rex Dew order, which is the Princes of Jerusalem that connects back to the Essenes, and Priory of Sion, which is the ennobled bloodlines of the Rex Dew line, who Godfrey de Bouillon was part of, and he was a member of both Rex Dew and of the Priory of Sion, and he formed this whole new group called the Order of the Red Cross in 1099, which became the Knights Templar. And so if we look at the list of the names in the Priory of Sion that go from mid-20th century or so, it'll go back to about 1188. And that's because in 1188 there was a ceremony called the cutting of the elm, which is French for orme. And the elm tree and Ormus is obviously connected with transliteration and connection there. But the splitting of the elm was the splitting of the Priory of Sion with the Knights Templar order, because the Priory, the noble bloodlines, had felt that the Templars had lost their way, that they were no longer following the objectives of what the Priory and the Order of the Red Cross wanted, and they were more interested in power and greed and money, and so they split away. And that's also why the Priory didn't help lending support to the Templar organization when the French king and the Roman Catholic Church came down on them in 1307 to disband them. So before 1188, if you want to look at see who would be an older list of Rosicrucian names, because it's the same organization, look at the Grand Masters of the Knights Templar, because before 1188 they were the same order. So let's connect. We've talked about the Gnostic order out of Alexandria of Ormus as a connection with Gnostics, and we talked about Rex Dew, and we talked about the Priory of Sion. So let's move this back a little bit. So if we look at the time of Constantine, the order of the Rosy Cross that was reestablished, say circa 325 CE, and they became the Brotherhood of the Red Cross. And out of this group, there's a set of monks that coordinate down the road with Godfrey de Bouillon in about 1090 to say, let's reignite this order that was established by Constantine. So this is a bit of the sort of connect the dots back, and those were the Calabrian monks. But this order that was reconstituted under Constantine is the order of builder guilds that go back into prehistory. These are the same builder guilds that helped build the first and second temples and the ancient structures in the ancient world. And I'll connect those in the book all the way back to Dionysus and the Dionysian builders that go right back to the time of the flood, and they inherit their knowledge from before the flood. So let me just fill in some of the blanks for some of the people on this.
Okay.
So we have this order, this religion called Manichaeans that is very, very famous for being around at the time of Jesus. And the Manichaeans were a Gnostic order, and they were eventually persecuted into submission by the Catholic Church. But what they did was they molded into the builder society of ancient Rome. And that was the Roman Collegia, as they call it. And they took over that agency for protection, and they were able to hide themselves from Catholic persecution because the Catholics needed them to build the churches. And so this is the same type of order that arises with the Templars down the road, this builder society with the Templars who take over the Masonry guilds at that time, and they're all responsible to the Templars, and they're able to move from country to country because the Templars have so much power given to them by the Catholic popes. And they introduce, from the knowledge that they bring back from Jerusalem, the Gothic technology, which way improves over what the Roman Collegia had done, where they didn't have these. The Roman Collegia built very small churches, stone churches, and they couldn't build them any bigger, and they couldn't put windows in because of the weight of the stone, and it would collapse on it. So the Gothic technology, what that does is it brings in these flying buttresses that allow you to do these soaring peaks and these huge cathedrals that stand to this day, today with these huge and beautiful glass windows. And this is the knowledge that was brought back from Jerusalem. So this is the same Roman Collegia that is building all of the churches once Christianity takes over, and it's the same organization that works with Constantine and the Brother of the Red Cross. Now we move this back into the Knights of the East and the West, which are part of the Essenes. And so the Essenes, they believe that they are let me just explain the Essenes a little bit first. The Essenes are the third religion of Judea at the time of Jesus. So you have the Sadducees, you have the Pharisees, and you have the Essenes. And the Essenes are the polytheist religion that believe that they have the true religion of Judaism that comes from Moses, who was a magi, and he learned all of the mysticism in Heliopolis and the Great White Brotherhood there and the Egyptian religion, which he probably did. But we all know from Scripture that he converted and threw that belief system away and became a monotheist and took the Israelites to Israel and created the religion that we know the Israelites had. Of course, the Essenes believe that's the false religion, and they believe the true religion is the polytheist religion out of Heliopolis. And so these were the people that were mixing in with these builder guilds that go back to the Second Temple and the First Temple. And the order that they were mixing in with here that they joined to help were called the Knights of the East and the Knights of the West. And this was originally set up in the Old Testament under the time of Darius and Jerubbaal. And this is the knowledge that comes back to Jerusalem to build the temple. Where this knowledge comes from King Solomon and King Tyre and these Dysonian builder guilds from Tyre, where they get that information from. And so you can see this whole connection down through the Knights of the East and West, down through Constantine, down through the Calabrian monks, down to the Knights Templar, and they all have the Red Cross as their symbol.
Were their names changed, do you think, to help keep them as a secret group?
Which group are we talking about?
Well, I mean, from when they started and the scenes and the way that it's went from being, you've got the Freemasons, you've got the Rosecrucians, they're standalone groups. Yes. But through history, it seems that the names have changed. We no longer really hear about a Knights Templar in modern days.
Right. Well, as they were hunted down or just broken up or persecuted or whatever, they do evolve and they do change their names, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Masonry is one of those constant names, and Freemasonry is the more recent sort of way of describing the ancient Masonic
order from ancient history. So that name's kind of been relatively the same. And the Red Cross is the other thing to keep in mind. I think they had to split into these many groups just to ensure that they weren't such easy prey to be to be attacked or to be disembarked to the rest of the world and broken up. So
Well, today you have to be from the elite groups. Back in history, all that way back, were these also elitist?
yes.
And they were well-to-do in their community?
Yes. So when we go back into prehistory where secret societies and mysticism came together, it was there to do the same goals that they're doing today. And so they were going to develop the knowledge and develop the religion and only give to the elite and the noble bloodlines the ability to reincarnate and what the true secrets are. And they didn't want the poor or the unennobled to be part of this. They may be there may be some that are in at the lower levels, like in Freemasonry, but as you move up that ladder, it's only for the elite, because they consider humans not part of their bloodlines as mundane, as they're like cattle to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the Rosecrucians, if they're the ones who did the Georgia Guidestones that talk about world population of, I think it's maximum 500 million they want in the earth, they'll slaughter us en masse.
Yes.
So when we look at the secret societies, it's always been there to keep it secret and away from the poor and away from the non-enlightened and the non-nobles and the non-elitists. That's exactly why they have secret societies and religions. And so if we want to look at how some of these secret societies moved through history, just look at the ancient mystery schools. That's where they house these beliefs, and only in the mystery schools, whether it's Pythagoras' mystery schools, it doesn't matter which one you look at, the long line that go through, they were only there to educate the nobles and the rich in the noble bloodline, just as they did in Egypt. It's a tradition that's been around since the antediluvian epoch. It started by Enoch the Evil and Cain, who, incidentally, are the patriarchs of the Rosecrucians. So they look at Enoch the Evil, descendant of Cain, and Tubal-Cain and as two of their most famous out of their history and their legends, their patriarchs.
You mentioned earlier about the Mark of Cain. What exactly is that?
Well, you'll hear a lot of descriptions of the Rosecrucis, and that's what they would call the Mark of Cain in one of its allegories. And so they would believe the Merovingians had a distinctive birthmark, and the Merovingians are part of this complete line. When I jumped from Constantine to the Templars, you have to remember the Merovingians were in between here. And Godfrey descends from the Merovingians. Godfrey is the founder of the Knights Templar. So yes, they believe it's the Mark of Cain, and they believe it is more than that too. So I don't know whether it's actually the Mark of Cain, but they believe that is. And as I said earlier, they believe that is a dragon or a serpent formed into a circle with that Essene Egyptian red cross with the circle on the top as the mark. And they call it the Rosecrucis or the Oribus. And the Rosecrucis is also representative of the kingship of Cain and Nephilim in the antediluvian epoch as well. So it has several other different names, and it also is known as the matriarchal blood of the dragon bloodline or the female bloodline. And it's also known, Rosecrucis, as starfire or the nectar of supreme excellence, which is blood. And this goes back to the blood-drinking aspects of Nephilim and of what happened at Babel and what they still do in these secret societies today, because they think by drinking blood, it enhances their cognizance and tradition. And I think initially the Nephilim were doing it to try and prolong their life as well. And it was considered in antiquity sort of the right and part of the benefits of being part of the nobility to be able to do this. Another aspect of the Rosecrucis is it's also known as the uterine womb of the Grail Queen. And this has significant sort of meaning as we roll forward. And what that means is, again, they're talking about the matrilinear bloodline, but they're also talking about the Grail, or as the Graal. as it was known in ancient Mesopotamia. And the Graal was this chalice that they drank the blood from. But the Grail is also the womb, and they also have this weird, strange ritual as well with blood, that they would drink the blood of the menstruum of the goddess. Mm-hmm. And that's where the lunar cycle and the moon goddess and everything comes into that aspect of it as well. And so this Grail womb was represented with this V. And that's the V that you see in most of the paintings of the Last Supper, that, not coincidentally, that Da Vinci painted, where you have the split between Jesus and John as what we would recognize as John. Mm-hmm. And there's no Grail on the table. And that split represents this V, this Graal of Mesopotamia. And there's no chalice on the cup. And, of course, as people know in the Da Vinci Code, is that person that we think that we call John, they say is Mary Magdalene, and it looks very female and has long hair. Now, it doesn't mean all paintings or all imageries of the Last Supper have that, just the famous Da Vinci one, because remember, Da Vinci is a Rosicrucian and a leader of the Priory of Sion and part of this whole group. So he's just encoding his beliefs into his paintings, which he was very, very famous for. But the Grail also comes forward as the Sangreal, or the royal blood, or the royal bloodline, and this is the basis for the Holy Grail literature that we were talking about earlier. So this whole sort of allegory just keeps resonating through time, and the Grail literature with King Arthur and Camelot, and incidentally Lot comes from Lot of Sodom and Gomorrah, because Camelot is the shining city of light, or the shining city of knowledge, just as Sodom was in the Gnostic belief system. So all of these imageries keep coming around, and it has the genealogies, their history, and their belief system in there. And what's done in the Grail literature is they're keeping track of the alleged descendants of Mary Magdalene and Jesus through their third son, Josephus, that married into the Grail kingships of King Arthur, and also into the Merovingian bloodline as well. So again, understand how all of this connects. So is it the Mark of Cain? They believe it is, but it's also so much more in their belief system than just the Mark of Cain. But it does start in the antediluvian epoch, and it starts with the kingships and the Nephilims and the blood drinking. And just another sort of quick connection is we look at, when I talked about the Rosicrucians creating theosophy, which created Ariosophy, which was the sort of the religious dynamite and the political dynamite to create National Socialism, they overlaid on this Ariosophy belief the Rosicrucian real belief. And this is, virile blood is something in the blood that is going to develop a superhuman or a new man or a new hero. And the Rosicrucian philosophy that was adopted in this belief system is that National Socialism demands, as does Rosicrucianism, the creation of super beings. So you have this blood racial mix being introduced that, again, goes right back to the true meaning of the Rosicrucis. Now, most people think the rose cross means a rose and a cross. Now, the rose is very, very important to their belief system. It's more like, most of them will say it's probably the dog rose because it comes back to life, and so it's sort of an allegory for reincarnation. But also, it's the five-petaled dog rose that if you map out, and they do because it's all part of their belief system, the orbit of Venus, that'll have that shape. And what's important is the reason why the rose is important to them and that Venus orbit is important to them is that is Lucifer, or the morning star, which is Venus in their belief system. And so if we look now at some of the other aspects to the rosy cross or the Rosicrucis, rosy is Latin for dew, and it's an elixir for blood, and it's also a play on red. And C-R-U-X, crux, is Latin for lux, where the three letters that form the cross are the three letters that form the word lux, or light. And so that's the symbolism there. You've got the circle and the cross. Those are the three characters on it. Mm-hmm. And, of course, lux is a derivative of Lucifer. And so, but this is what they're talking about is the light of Lucifer. They're talking about the elixir for immortality coming from Lucifer, and the other allegory. Because again, everybody needs to understand they have so many allegories, so many different meanings, so many different layers. That's why it takes them so long to learn all of this. Is the rosy dew or the red crucis is crucis in this second aspect of Rosicrucis. Crucus is also known as a chalice or a holy grail, and this red dew is again connecting the drinking of blood out of the grawl. So all of this stuff just keeps sort of going around and around in this concoction of their religion, and it's just amazing how many different levels of allegories and symbolism they have.
It's very deep. I do have a question about the dog rose. I had never heard that before your book. Now, is that related at all to the blossoms on a dogwood tree?
No.
Okay. The reason I'm asking that is because the cross that Jesus was crucified on was made out of dogwood, and I just thought it would be another way for them to turn things around if they turned it from being something that was holy into something that was evil.
Yeah, and I was not familiar with that, so maybe there is something to that, Kay, that I just haven't run across on. So possibly.
Yeah, that just stood out, and actually that's a question I've had for a while. When I knew that we were going to be doing this interview, I actually had the question before that, but I was just hanging on to it. I know I'm terrible, but that just really hit me. I thought, what if? But that it's interesting how the tentacles run deep and thick.
Yeah, and we're being inundated with all of their symbolism all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
They are absolutely brainwashing with us in preparation for when they come about and say this is what really happened. This is their revisionist history in the end times, so that people will say, well, that makes some sense.
You and I had spoke about this before. I don't know if we did it during the interview or if it was when we were talking after, but how the Shriners, even the Knights of Columbus, all of them all link together and even are connected to this. And I believe it's the Shriners that hand out the little red roses.
Yes, and the rose is a significant allegory for the Priory of Sion.
Mm-hmm.
It is for that was for the Templars, and it is for Rosecrucians.
What a way to advertise!
And what a way to advertise! Absolutely. And so, so people are probably wondering then maybe how high up are the Rosecrucians, and they're fairly high up. And there will be ennoble bloodlines from the ancient Nephilim and the 13 families that are represented and probably control the ruling of 36 that rule the Rosecrucians. But they are still falling below the really powerful organizations. And because we see some of the Rosecrucians, anything that we see that's visible, they want us to see. So you still have to get behind the curtain. That's another allegory of the Wizard of Oz. What's behind the curtain? That's part of their brainwashing as well. So, and above the Rosecrucian order is a few more that at least I am somewhat familiar with. And so you've got the Committee of 300 that the Rosecrucians report to, and the Committee of 300 reports to the Grand Druid Council of 33, and then they report to the 13 families. And then, of course, all of these ones at these levels are actively in communication with the invisible ones, or the Great White Brotherhood of the heavens. And they could, and in some cases, we need to understand that these are also the gray aliens, and whether or not you believe that they're a different being, or they're demons, or they're fallen angels, or it's the same group of entities that they're talking to.
The 300 and the societies, many people don't realize that America was originally founded by these same people.
If you look at Francis Bacon, who talked about the new Atlantis, they were part of this group that were envisioning that they were going to create the United States as the model for the new Atlantis. And this is just an older Templar dream. And again, that's why you see some of the stuff coming out where you've got investigative stories and narratives about Templars sailing over to North America, because they seemingly knew about North America before it was even known by everybody else. And if people don't think that the Templars or the Priory of Sion or any of these secret organizations like the Rosecrucians had anything to do with the discovery of North America, they should know that Christopher Columbus, when he first sailed over, flew with the banner of the Templars. And of course, the Templar had been disbanded by 1492. So what we're really seeing is he is going with the support of Freemasonry and the Rosecrucians and the Illuminati, and the very secretive and powerful secret societies that want North America developed, and particularly America developed.
Mm-hmm. And that will not be found in your history books in school.
No, it will not. And you know, when we look at what these secret societies are doing today, they work actively in areas that, you know, people just don't think about. So if you look at how you're going to always have new blood and new intelligence coming in, you need to be able to somehow draft these people into these organizations. And so that's why an organization like the Rhodes Scholarship was set up. And so what they did was they're there to get the new families and the new blood and any people who they think has great possibilities, to fund them and educate them in the schools of their choice. And this was established by Cecil Rhodes and the Rothschilds, and it's still funded by them today. And another area where they'll draft people into these secret societies from already existing families will be organizations in the universities like the Skull and Bones. And so this thing is going on ongoing. And when we look at how some of these things connect back, like the Rhodes and the Fabian Society formed what they call roundtables for Woodrow Wilson, who created organizations that came out of that, like the CFR. If people don't know who the Fabian Society is, this was the group that was formed by Rosecrucianism to create social masonry, and they are the founding organization to have socialism brought into the West and into Russia as well and into the East. And so when we look at all these different aspects that these people are working on all the time, it has tentacles that just go absolutely everywhere. You know, so I would very much encourage people to dig further into who the Rosecrucians were and understand how important that they are. Even though the Illuminati is important, even though Freemasonry is important and Jesuits are important, these ones have, this Rosicrucian order has more ennobled bloodlines and more weight because it's actually at the apex of that pyramid of Freemasonry and Illuminati and Rosicrucianism.
And this is something that in our day-to-day lives, as you said, that it's all around us. We're inundated with it. It's something that we need to be aware of because we are being brainwashed and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And, you know, I was just thinking about something completely different, and I'll just sort of mention this, is you know, when the Templars were first formed in 1099, they didn't actually have the Red Cross, so they just had the white garbs. And the white garbs at that time, and still are representative of the Great White Brotherhood. That goes right back. It says, you know, the Essenes wore white robes, and the Egyptians wore white robes. And so this was the garb that they put on. And when it was St. Bernard, the leader of the Cistercians and the most powerful person in Catholicism at that time, next to the Pope, and perhaps even more popular, more powerful than the Pope, he had them don the Red Cross because he being a Cistercian and Benedictine, coming out of these orders of the Manichaeans and the Roman Collegia and the reignited Order of the Cross in the time of Constantine, and were the ones that organized the information coming out of Jerusalem and the seven sacred sciences and taught the new Mason guilds the new knowledge out of Jerusalem. The point being is they're part of that same group of Gnostic monks that were molded into Catholicism, and again, another sort of pillar of what goes up right beside the Order of the Red Cross, the Gnostic mold, builder aspects of it. They always go together along with the secret societies, which the Templars were as well, and the Priory Sion is. And this goes right back to ancient history, right back to Enoch the Evil and the time and the rise of the Nephilim and the bloodlines of the Nephilim. Because just as in those times they built monuments to honor their gods, they do that today. Just as the pyramids were built to honor their gods, and perhaps even Mount Hermon, just as things like Stonehenge were built, and the great cathedrals of the post-Diluvian period, all things are being done not to honor our God, just as Babel was done with the pyramid again in the city and the craft of masonry. It's there to honor the great architect of the universe, which is Lucifer.
Yes, and they will not openly tell you that, so you have to do your research.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you want to, you look at one of the organizations that does a lot of the research on the pyramid, look at an organization called AMORC. That's a Rosecrucian order. They're the ones who get most of the information out to us, whether it's misinformation or not, coming out of the pyramids, because they control this information.
So they can actually put as much as they want out there without question. There's no accountability.
No, they have complete control.
Now, if someone today wanted to donate to a group, like the Shriners Collect, of course, and several others, before they would make a donation to someone, how would they find out if that group would happen to be linked to an organization like the Rosecrucians?
Well, you have to understand the Shriners are basically Illuminati. Anytime that you've got an organization that has initiation and a code of secrecy, it is all part of their genitive organizations. And I notice on Fox TV, there's this absolutely terrific advertisement for these hospitals that the Shriners put up. And they do a great job on it. But at the end, that commercial, and it's the first time I've ever seen it, is actually have the symbols of Freemasonry in the bottom right-hand corner. I was absolutely stunned, but they're actually being more visible on that. But if it's a night order, I don't care whether it's in the Catholic Church or outside the Catholic Church. If it's got secret initiations and you're climbing some sort of ziggurat of knowledge and you're sworn to secrecy, any organization that has that, you should be very, very careful of. Even though a lot of these organizations at the lower levels do spectacular work for charity. That's just a cover for the ones at the core to do the things under the cover that they need and that nobody will notice.
Mm-hmm. My take on it is if I'm going to make a donation to something, I will take it directly, mail it to that direct source. I will not go through a third party.
That's my preference and my wife's preference as well. Is whether it's food directly to the poor. Anytime you can take through food banks or whatever other sources that go direct, don't give it to the government. Don't give it to charities. Try and take it direct so that none of that money is wasted or siphoned off. And you should be at that point then in control of that you're giving according to your own belief system.
That's right. Exactly. That's how I see it.
When you look at so many of the charity organizations in the world, I mean, these are organizations that are been formed by these secret societies. And their agenda is, yes, to help. But their agenda is also to bring in one world government. And these organizations, they have the ability to have people put their guards down and think beyond their own national borders, to think more of a global society as a global citizen. They use that as their propaganda funding to brainwash people. And they do the same thing with environmental organizations, again, because everybody wants a good environment. Nobody wants our planet polluted, but they understand so well that environmental issues cross all borders, breaks down all nationalism, so they fund it with their left-wing ideology.
Yes, and the people that are attempting to do God's work, they can be taken in easily if they're not staying in the Word, if their walk's not close, and they don't test. We're told to test the spirits. Well, that also means to test anything that we have to deal with in our daily lives, because that's the only way we're going to be able to tell if something is of good or of evil or is of God.
Absolutely. And it's not that we don't donate to these larger organizations, but we prefer to do, because we do, but we prefer to do it directly and also through churches. Do like to do it that way and hope that that money is being used well, and I believe it is. Shouldn't be putting a negative thing on it, but if you're being very, very sort of critical or cynical, the only way to assure that that money is going to the right purpose is you give it directly to a person who's going to have it and utilize it. But that's not really realistic. So you have to have some faith, and so
That's
we
true.
do a combination. Yeah. So we do a combination of both, but we do mostly through the churches and that we support, and through direct agencies that are providing things to people who need it.
Yes. Well, is there anything else, Gary, that have we missed anything with the Rosecrucians tonight?
I was just racking my brain. I think we've covered, a fair bit of territory, but I would really underline that anything that's, if you want to see Rosicrucian influence, just look at our entertainment, whether it's in fairies or elves or in Dracula. And I talked about the Ordo Draconis or the vampires and the relationships there, and I'll connect those in the books. Whether or not it's Shakespeare or the classics, and I don't care whether it's Homer or Titans or Atlantis or science fiction, where we see all these different beings and the alien sort of thing. This is all Rosicrucian knowledge, literature, genealogy, and propaganda, and they're utilizing it all of the time. And any new shows that you see coming out that has anything to do with any sort of organizations, watch for the symbolism that goes in there, because it's absolutely loaded with it, because it's all part of the propaganda aspect. And again, I don't care whether you're looking at Wagner or Bach. I don't care whether you're looking at Robin Hood or Tolkien or Narnia. This is all Rosicrucian symbolism.
Yes.
That is the religion that they are setting us up for the end time.
And once you're aware of it, it is so easy to spot.
Yeah. And people don't think that Merlins and wizards, whether it's Harry Potter or so many of these other, I guess, Grail or fairy tale type stories that mix in wizards, whether it's Tolkien or whoever, they need to understand that these were the wizards of Atlantis. These are the same wizards that partnered with the kings of the pharaohs and in Chaldea and the Magi. This is their religion, front and center, going right into our children's ears and minds.
Yes. And we have to watch that as parents and grandparents. And I mean, we have to look out for our kids, because my theory is, or my way of thinking is, that no one else is going to. It's up to us. So we need to take control of that. And there's enough of us that if we stay away from those things, we can send a very, very powerful message.
Yes. And again, if we're going to, in my opinion, and people may disagree with me on this, but if we are going to read them the fairy tales, and if we are going to let them indulge in these fantasies that and they are just everywhere, is we need to really educate our children what those symbols are really representing and how that's different than our belief system, so that they can critically analyze what they're watching, at least.
Very good point. Well, Gary, time always just flies by when you're on with me. I enjoy having you on so much. Would you please let everyone know where they can access your website, how they can order your book, and the fact that you also put up samples from each chapter of your book so people can get an idea what it's like?
Absolutely. So if you want to look on my website, you can go to www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. So www.genesis6conspiracy.com. And on my website, I post a generous excerpt on all 98 chapters, so you get a flavor and for how the book is laid out. Also on my website, and this one I'll post this interview when I can as well. I post all of my interviews, so there's a news and media section if you want to listen to some interviews, and for the newer ones, I put that on the front page, so they'll be in both locations. If you're looking to buy a book, you can get an autographed copy from me through my website on Buy from the Author, and I'll personalize it any way you want, or do my standard personalization, and that's available on a secure transaction site. You can also link to Amazon.com and Amazon.ca if you want to buy the book from Amazon, and it will be less money from them. And if you're from somewhere else other than Canada or the United States, it's available on Amazon around the world, as it is on most online selling companies. It's also available through BarnesandNoble.com, and Barnes & Noble also makes it available. You can do a pickup at the store. If you wanted to buy my book through your local Christian bookstore, if they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it, and they order it through Send the Light Distribution, who distributes to the Christian bookstores and is the distributor for my book. And if you want to follow me on Facebook, I'm under Gary Wayne, and you can contact me and ask me questions anytime. I also have a couple of Genesis 6 pages on Facebook. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Gary Wayne 63.
Wonderful. I wasn't aware that your books were available worldwide. Deception Detection is now heard all around the world, so this is wonderful. People can go ahead and hear tonight's broadcast, and prayerfully they'll pick up a copy.
Yeah, and it's also available on Kindle as well. So, like, if I've received a fair bit of notifications of people in New Zealand or Australia who have bought Kindle, but I've also mailed books to Norway and other countries around the world as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I think that's fun to think that you're communicating to people all over the world.
Yeah, it's really quite humbling.
Yes. And I want to tell everyone, I'm on my second reading of Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I absolutely love the book, and I keep it right with my Bible. It is an absolutely wonderful Bible companion. And if you're going to spend any money on a book, this is the one that I recommend. You just can't get any, other than the Bible, you just can't get any better than this.
Well, thank you for your generous and kind comments. That's high praise indeed. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's just the truth. I mean, it's like I have it right with my Bible, and I use it very often. And my mind goes off on these tangents like I told you about, and I have to get a little bit deeper and find out. So, well, I'm going to go ahead then and say the closing prayer. And yes, so are you ready, Gary?
I am.
Okay. Dear Father, thank you. You have been with us tonight, and you have led the broadcast, and we're praying that your word has just landed on all the people listening, and it has went into their ears and on their heart. And you are such an awesome God, and we thank you, Lord, for bringing Gary Wayne on with us again tonight. He has nothing to say, Lord, that isn't in line with your doctrine, what your Bible says, and he sheds more light and makes it understandable on some of those points that we read that sometimes we just don't quite understand what it means or how deep that it goes. And we appreciate so much that you have blessed Gary with that knowledge and made him available to come on and share that with all of us. And Father, please be with Gary. Please bless his ministry through his book and in his life. And please bless all the listeners. Walk with them and watch over them, Lord, and keep them safe. And the same with Gary. And again, Lord, I just thank you for all your blessings because they just abound from you, Lord. There is no end. And in Jesus' holy and mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, that's going to do it for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a blessed week, and good night, everyone.